So Dan, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Jeff Radichel, founder of the Next Step Group, which is a consulting organization for manufacturers primarily. And I'd like to introduce Dan Koch here today, who's with us from Bridgewater Bank. And, if you haven't heard of him, you're in for a treat because Dan's been instrumental in fostering strong community engagement and has an incredible wealth of experience in building meaningful relationships within and outside of the business world. I mean, Dan, we've talked a little bit about this when we've gotten together in just terms of that passion, that commitment in terms of developing community. So welcome today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate you having me. I think those words were a little too kind, but but I appreciate that.
It's all
I'll
right.
let
It's
my
okay
family
for me to
know.
dote a little bit. It's all right.
Oh, I'll let my family know.
Yeah, you'll have the recording now. You can just play it for them anytime you need to in the future.
That's
So the
right.
topic here today, the main focus of our discussion is how to build relationships and invest in the community. So I think this is it's a passion area for both of us. I know we've talked about this. And so what I'd like to do is kind of work through this topic of building relationships and investing in the community, especially as it comes to leaders in these organizations. Like they're thinking all the time, like we get so busy and so focused on execution of what we've got in the moment that often these community investing opportunities get shoved to the side, right? It's like
Yeah.
an afterthought. It's not something we don't think about in terms of the cultural development. We don't think about it in terms of who we are as an organization. So I think this is a good discussion. So within the first frame of that discussion, I'd like to talk a little bit about what community engagement, is as a core business strategy. So the question I'd have for you is, well, why should business leaders prioritize community engagement?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, as I was growing up, I was truly fortunate and blessed that I had some great role models, whether it be my parents, my in-laws who I've known for 30 years, so I consider them my parents, and their contemporaries, and a lot of them were key leaders in the community, corporate executives, things like that who were involved in community, whether it be nonprofit organizations, civic organizations, and also trade organizations and missions. And I saw like what they were doing, and saw like, man, this is just like it's not even it's kind of a no-brainer. Like it's just like you show up. It's a I view this involvement as an obligation to your
Yeah,
community,
yeah.
not as a boy, this would be really good for my business, or for me to develop relationships. So I don't start there. I don't start as like, what am I going to get out of this? It's what can I contribute to it, because I need to be a part of my community. And I think that's an important thing for, whether you're a business or an individual. If you're a business owner or leader, or just an individual who wants to help their community. I just think that that's an important. It's what we're supposed to be doing.
It's interesting as you're talking about this, two things come to mind. First off, you talk about the discussion of, why do we do it? And to you're saying, well, this is basic. You should just be doing it because it's the right thing to do. But one of those things that come back of whom are you trying to serve, right? So if you think about like what our responsibilities are and whom we're trying to serve, even if we think about it purely from our own business standpoint and within the organization, the people within the organization, not thinking about the impact to the environments around the people that we're serving inside the organization, customers, clients. The community side is one of the ways that we impact those people that we're trying to serve. I think that's such a key thing. And one of the questions I always ask people is, so we have this community around us, what's the cost in doing nothing? And sometimes when you start to think about that, there is a cost to not doing anything in terms of serving the community around you, both from a long-term impact to your teams, your customers, your family, all that. There is a cost to doing nothing.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great point. I think if you look at like a healthy community, I think you've got. I mean, engagement is a key part of that, and it's not just It's not just like at civic or at city hall. It's not just the politicians and all that, because that helps, and that, like, they kind of keep the machine running a little bit. But it's kind of on the ground, and I'm probably going to use a lot of cliches and cheesy words
It's
as
all
we.
right. We'll just start recording them. That's great. Like,
Right, right. But it truly is like kind of grassroots, like boots on the ground, like the individuals. Every community has needs out there. And there's different ways for businesses to get involved. There's local nonprofits that kind of help people who are in need. There are civic engagements, so getting involved with the city and helping to shape policy. And then there's also things that are specific to your industry, like the Minnesota Precision Manufacturers Association or things like that. Local chambers of commerce that I think add, like they have obviously a mission for benefiting that trade, but there's also a lot of I guess nonprofit or service-based missions to that work as well, that will help kind of guide kind of guide the organization, if you will. So those are just a couple of different areas I see where businesses can get involved and help shape policy.
so
Not
I love
sure.
I
Oh, go
love
ahead.
how you're saying that though, because it starts with listening to whom you're trying to serve. Who in the community are you trying to serve? And I think about ourselves, like we primarily serve presidents of manufacturing companies, right? So
Yep.
we took that upon ourselves to say, well, how do we better serve them? So we actually created a nonprofit to help people in transition, primarily in the manufacturing community, because by doing it, it would foster a growth in the skills and development for the manufacturing community, which not only helps those individuals going through it, but it helps whom we're trying to serve. So there's ways to tie this community involvement that is in line with whom we're trying to serve.
Correct. It doesn't have to be, well, this is either related to my business or related to the community. I think it's very, very much integrated. I also think, it also depends on what size town your business is located. You could be in a small town and have a huge impact on the community, or you could be in a large town like Minneapolis and you feel like a smaller part of a big machine. Um, Either way you can be impactful, but I think there are different levels of I guess need, or kind of how you fit into the puzzle just based on where you are.
And so maybe this would be a good opportunity for you to talk a little bit about being specific, for you, for Bridgewater, like how do you personally, how does Bridgewater as an organization look for ways to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are somewhat driven by well, so banks have what's called a Community Reinvestment Act. I hesitate to call them obligations, but like we are required to reinvest in our community in certain ways. So we have to choose kind of areas where we can make a financial impact within the community. So that is somewhat of a guiding. I guess it kind of puts some structure around like where we want to focus our attention. Now within that, there's a whole lot of things we can do. Bridgewater has, we are a commercial real estate based, a concentrated bank. We do a lot of work with multifamily housing developers.
Mhm.
And Bridgewater specifically has decided that, but we have an expertise in affordable housing development. So we finance a significant number of projects in the affordable housing space. So we work with those developers in developing affordable communities throughout the Twin Cities and actually in other parts of the country as well. So we have a mission statement, a very kind of specific mission statement regarding community involvement. A fair amount of it is involved or kind of centered around affordable housing, and it's where Bridgewater spends a lot of our like volunteer time and resources with our contributions and things like that. But we have a mission statement. We have for community involvement. It's kind of lived and breathed from the top down. We support those organizations through bank-wide initiatives. But then we also empower employees to go out and find their own path. Like, we give employees a couple days a year off of PTO to go out and volunteer in organizations that they are passionate about. And so things like that, it's just, I guess, kind of an overall mindset of this is important to the organization. Yes, we have to do some of it, but we really want to do this. And
So I
yeah,
love that because I was just talking with Sean O'Driscoll on another one of these meetups, this podcast, and one of the things that we talked about was intentional culture. And what it sounds like, what's really cool about this is the first step is actually being intentional about it, meaning it's part of our investment strategy, right? Where a certain allocation of percent goes to this type of activity. We're measuring the activity, both in things like how much PTO time are we delivering to it? How much financial means are we delivering to it? How many projects? So I think a good starting point is being intentional. How does it fit into your budget? How are you going to resource it? How are you going to, intentionally drive team members to look? And I love that as a step one is be intentional about that investment.
yeah, yeah. And we even we go as far as we keep track of everybody's volunteer hours. So we submit them on a monthly or regular basis, and it actually is like kind of awards and recognitions for people who have the most hours of volunteer service throughout a quarter or a year. So, and it becomes so that's kind of like a little not necessarily a fun competition, but it's a cool. I mean, it is a fun competition, and that's volunteering outside of it could count with like a bank sponsored initiative, but it's most of our employees. We rack up our volunteer hours on non-bank related service ventures.
Yeah, so let's go right at the topic because a lot of
Yeah.
people like they don't maybe they think, oh, that sounds all nice, but I'm, struggling as a business, president. I don't got the time to do this, all that. So let's just wade into this whole what's the impact successfully for the business and not dance around it at all. So think about the impact of strong relationships and doing this type of work on the business success itself. In that topic, how did the strong relationships that you develop through these community involvements drive success for the business, especially financial, or let's say specifically for, let's say, someone in the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, so I'll speak just quickly about like how it is, like how does it impact me and my business. My business as a commercial banker, my role is to work with small and medium-sized businesses, real estate investors and developers, and it's really a sales and relationship-based um, business for me. I mean that's the core of what I do. And so what this does, like when you're involved, let's just take a nonprofit organization. Let's say you're on a board of a nonprofit organization. Um, you are there with other kind of sometimes type A personalities who are driven and motivated to do a good thing. It's So the network that you build of quality people is invaluable. I mean, it just gives you access to, I think, quality people. That I think translates whether you're in banking or manufacturing. A lot of these organizations in town, I mean, the Twin Cities market as it's a great business community. We have a number of Fortune 500 companies, large corporations, and then there's all sorts of feeder businesses. In manufacturing, I've worked with manufacturers who they do business with like Medtronic or the likes of that, and they say, you know, the likelihood that when you're involved in a nonprofit board, the likelihood that you're going to run across somebody from Medtronic or a General Mills or you name it is pretty high because all of these large corporations that we do business with are sending people out there in these organizations. So it's a network. I mean, the number one thing is a network of people that you get in front of. Now, specifically, like how does that help a manufacturer? Well, it could be sales based. You know, you never know where you're going to get your next project from something like that. Um, it could also be just learning best practices. You know, a lot of these meetings you go into, like I've heard in nonprofits like lean production, and then like people in the nonprofit sector are going out to like Japan to visit the Toyota factory and learn about lean production. Now, whether that translates to your business or not, it's up to you. But like you get introduced to a lot of these concepts. Uh, but just by talking to people and talking to people in different walks of life.
Yeah, one of the big things I've found over the course of time is, you know, my wife is a chiropractor, and one of the things that she was told from a mentor early on is be careful who you want to serve because they have a tendency of breeding more of themselves, right? So part of that is when you're working in these kind of community-oriented engagements with other people in that community, you're actually finding more like-minded people that are
Yeah,
really part of your tribe in terms of mental thought and a good fit around who you should be working with, right, in
yeah,
general. And so I think from what I've experienced is, when we start talking about some of these community core, these are really tied back to core values and desired outcomes of how you're serving. And invariably, what it ends up doing is aligning the ideal
yeah,
people to partner with, whether it's clients, customers, vendors, whatever it might be. You start aligning with other like-minded people, and it just drives both, the business side of around getting around more like-minded people where you share those values, but also it drives, like you said, the continuous learning opportunity because everybody's trying to do this, they're trying to benefit, the community in the same way.
yeah, yeah. And you know, it's one of those. Well, you're in the consulting world. You help other companies kind of see what they maybe should be seeing, or
Sure.
you know.
Yeah.
But when you go to these meetings, you know, you go to a nonprofit board meeting, and you know, as a board member, you are giving advice to this company, but you're also hearing other like it's sometimes it's a good check of like, you know, I can go to a meeting and wax poetic and give my 2 cents, and then I should it's always like a self-reflection point too of like,
Yeah.
oh, that was really good advice I just gave them. I should follow it myself.
Really? That happens? Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
so speak then, I guess the next thing is speak to them what you've seen as some of the long-term impacts of making that. So you talked a little bit about some of the short-term impacts, whether it's maybe new contacts, best in class process, whatever it is. But what have you seen in terms of the long term? If someone's playing the long ball and they're really trying to develop those communities, those networks around them, what's the long-term benefits?
yeah. And I look at it truly as a long the long game. I look at it as a long-term benefit. Like if we're talking specifically about like what do I get out of it, which sounds like a selfish aspect to take, but let's just stick with that angle for a little bit. I don't I don't join any of these organizations or spend my time volunteering for any quick hit. I do not. Like the long game for me is, you know, and I'm not a very like when I'm at these places and in these meetings, I just say who I am and what I do, and then kind of let like however I show up at those meetings or at those events is what like kind of the image of who I am, and like that so I want that to kind of build long-term trust from people saying, oh, like I liked what he said, or like, you know, I disagree with him but we disagreed in a civil way or whatever. It's a long-term thing, and I'm not looking at it from, so I'm building that over time. I am not looking for a quick hit. I don't go to these things saying, hey, I'm Dan, where do you bank, and are you happy, and we should talk about it. Now maybe I could be more aggressive on that sort of thing, but it's like I'll let you know what I do, and if you ever have a need, you know where I am. If you trust and respect what you've seen from me in other ways. I've seen this play out where, I mean, it just happened a few weeks ago. I've one of the boards that I'm on, been on it for 10 years, And I just got a referral from a guy that I'm on the board with, one of his clients who's looking for a new banking relationship. That's 10 years in the making. That's not like that's most of us would probably say, well, that's not
The
worth my
ROI wasn't there or whatever. Yeah.
right. But and it's these things, it's a slow sales process, but I don't even look at it as a sales process. I look at it as like, if I guess maybe if I'm selling anything, I'm selling me.
Well, and so I think even from our conversations, there's a reason that, you're my banker, right? Like
Yeah.
we've talked about this in terms of I went out and searched a lot of banks and I searched a lot of relationships. And I think the key goes back to, is there alignment in terms of philosophy, approach, long-term, kind of play for those types of people that you want to hang out with, going back to that whole idea of who's your tribe. One of the things that I've appreciated in terms of how, as we're talking about it, is it naturally, if you're focused on the community side, if you're focused on the long-term play side and those type of things, just like it worked out for you and me, it'll work out for others where their tribe will naturally kind of gravitate to them.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you cast a broad net, and you're out there in the community, this happens in business relationships, it happens in friendships, outside of work. You do like like sometimes you get lucky and lightning strikes, and like you just like have that immediate connection. A lot of times it just takes a little time for it all to shake out and filter out. And like you say, like you have, I think in life, like you have probably like there's you got a core group that you are super close with and you'll share anything with. Then there's a group outside of that you trust, and it's just kind of like the different layers of your tribe, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And just building on that and knowing who you can turn to.
So I feel pretty good about how we've kind of talked through the community engagement from a strategic standpoint, foundational to long-term success. I think we've established that. So I'd like to move into the actual building of it, right? So how do we build and nurture relationships? The area I'd like to start is, we're talking process, right? So what are the
Yeah.
practical steps to build these meaningful relationships? And so from your perspective, what are the practical steps that a business leader can take to start building a strong community, strong relationships within the community?
Yeah, I guess first of all is as I mentioned before, like Bridgewater has a mission around this. So I think the first thing is for a business owner or leader would be to develop a mission for this kind of engagement. What are you looking to get in? Like, what are you looking to put into it, and what are you looking to get out of it? And have a mission statement around it. And then I think it's when you have that mission, I think it's pretty easy to seek out opportunities within this town. I mean, the Twin Cities, it's obviously there's a lot of people. It's a big town, but it's also a small town. The network here is pretty there's a lot of great opportunities, but it's a pretty close, tight-knit network, I think. And so you find the organization or find where you want to get involved and make the ask. Like you like get involved, like try to like see who's like look at like everybody's got a website. You can look at like the board roster, see who's out there and start making connections, and whether it's starting at a board level or whether it's just as a volunteer somewhere and kind of cracking the nutshell a little bit. I think that's a good thing. As far as yeah, I mean, and it's like I said, it's a long term thing. Don't look for a quick hit on it.
And I would say it takes time to develop, right? So I can just speak on a personal note. We've gotten to a mission statement, which is simply bring clarity to others.
Sure.
Okay. We didn't get there overnight. But
Yeah.
then, like, how do I describe what does it mean from a focus to bring clarity to others? We're looking at how do we bring clarity to client partners and vendors and the manufacturing community. And so our nonprofit that we created was specific around helping people in transition in the manufacturing community gain clarity, right? Understanding their God-given gifts, the skills, the things that they should be applying to the community to help them move forward. At that point, then the mission statement actually applies to the ecosystem. It applies to those that aren't even giving us any, money, but are part of that ecosystem to develop that community. But it also ties to our vendors, clients, and partners to do the same thing. So I love that starting point of developing the mission, but also understanding it doesn't have to be perfect right away.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
start the journey and you'll refine it over the course of time, right? I think that's one of the lessons I learned.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And it's like that's an area where like if I've been stuck in life, it's because I think I have to have the whole path all planned out and have be an expert on like where if I take this first step, well, like how am I going to take every other step in there? And like sometimes like you just don't know. And if you don't take that first step and you can like you can change course over time, but yeah, you don't get yourself just stuck because you think you have to have it perfect up front.
Yeah, and so, think about it from how do you approach, personally approach networking and relationship building? Can you just really quickly like you talk about practical business steps, but now let's assume that I've got the mission statement, some of those things work out. Do you have a practical approach to how I should go about networking and relationship building?
Yeah, so how I've done it, and I live in the Western Twin Cities, so I live in Wayzata. It's a small town. I grew up in the area, in the Wayzata, Plymouth area.
So
And
did
so
I.
yeah, exactly. And so, it's just kind of a natural fit. Like I've been in that community for so long that, I've just got so many connections there, and I don't say that, and like I hope that doesn't come across
No,
as,
it's just the natural
condescending.
place. That's
But
your natural starting point, right?
I still see people like, that I went to church with when I was in junior high and high school, and like these were parents of my classmates and friends, and I still see them around town, and a lot of them have done like pretty good things in their life, and that so these are like the people I've been around, and I've just like so kind of it probably started with getting involved in a local nonprofit organization called Interfaith Outreach, which is they have a ton of business leaders who are a part of that organization. And I was fortunate to kind of ride some coattails along the way and get involved in that organization. And I'm still there today,
You
like
found
about
your tribe.
30 years later. And like
Yeah.
the organization has changed leadership and all that, but like I'm still involved in it in certain
Yeah.
ways. Yeah. So that's a good tribe.
Yeah.
Um, the local chamber of commerce was one of those that was back in the day, just kind of a no-brainer of this is where you go to be a part of the community. I've always looked at it because your question about like what's my approach to doing that or building these networks and relationships. It's I'm fortunate to be kind of rooted in a small community, relatively speaking. And those relationships, I think I just rooted them down, early in life, even starting back in high school. And then, you kind of move around a bit and you keep coming back to the same area and it's the same people that are there. And those relationships, I think it just takes time and it's just been involvement in a lot of different areas, and just getting to know as many people as possible. I do not, like I said earlier, I do not put a hard sell on. I do not put like I let people know what I do, and then I get to know them. And you have to show up too. Like you have to be there, not just to get things out of it, but to give. Like to hey, how can I help you? Um, and I think that's a super important part. Like it's not I don't go into it with the mindset of how can you help me? It's how can I help you?
Yeah, so it's interesting about that is, we talked a little bit about finding that core group, but part of that is as you're building these, you're focusing. So it's kind of like when we talk to people in transition networking. I talked to an individual recently. They said in 3 months, they met physically with 300 people and they connected with 3,500 people on social media. And my reaction back is, you must be exhausted. And they're like, yes, absolutely, I'm exhausted. I think that point of focus becomes really key. Like there are 4,300 manufacturers in the Twin Cities alone, right? Like if you think about just the size of those ecosystems, at some point you have to focus on whom you're trying to serve, who you're going to work with, that community that you can't serve everybody or you serve nobody, right? And so this idea of developing relationships within the framework of that community you're trying to support ends up becoming, I think, pretty important.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
And so, closing out this idea of, you're looking at those connections, you're looking at those relationships to build trust and grow over the course of time. And that idea that it's not about the number of connections, it's more about the depth of the key connections, I think is kind of the way I would wrap up this section.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And there's also like, there's transactional business and there's relationship business. And I guess you kind of, depending on what your business needs are, you also, I guess, that could make a difference. Like, in banking, it's more relationship based,
Hmm.
but there are transactions out there that happen, and that's fine too. Um, I think you just kind of have to look at what your business needs are there, or maybe it's a mix of both transactional and relationship based
So,
opportunities.
so moving into like a real life example, do you have just one good real life example of how a group went through the process of maybe implementing this kind of a strategy into their business model and what the benefit slash impact both for the business and the community?
I'll go to the cardinal manufacturing model that we've talked about a little bit, which is I think it started at a school district in Wisconsin, in is it Sturm, Wisconsin?
Hmm.
And it is like it started with I think a shop teacher saying, "Hey, like we'd love to collaborate with a local manufacturing company, and get students like seeing a path forward who like maybe aren't going off to college and going into a desk job." And so they started a program which is a student-run manufacturing business. And students get in there. It's a 2-year program that students have to apply for. They get in and they learn the nuts and bolts. So they're learning about how to bid a project. They're learning how to order materials, maintain profitability for the organization, and they are learning how to run a company. And it's I think a an invaluable education, and probably, and it costs the students nothing but their time and commitment. It creates a path forward, I think, for a lot of students who look and get excited about, wow, this is really cool. Like I can be a part of something tangible that I can really help, like develop myself and build something. And see that like this is what my life is going to look like. This is what I could do for a lifetime. From a business standpoint, it just creates the next generation of those business leaders and employees in the organization who are going to be there and show up, and they're the ones that you're going to want to hire. They're the ones that you're going to want to take their advice and help you run your company.
Yeah, and I think about this like, in our community, right? We don't often talk about at the legislative level like manufacturing, even though it's our largest sector, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah,
And, it kind of gets left on the side. But you look at this case of what Cardinal did, in that they're actually building, and it's not necessarily for their own benefit, they're building up the community of trained people that continues the legacy of the community being able to do the work of that sector, which is it's not a short-term benefit to them, right? They don't
right,
see the short term, but they take the investment opportunity to invest in a community so that their community doesn't die in
right.
the sense of that key skill set within the community. And so it's just the right thing to do. You're investing in the workforce, in the community, you're building relationships, you're teaching, training the next generation. Yes, you're going to get some practical benefit because people will stay in your organization, you'll build that next gen, but it's hard to quantify that in the short term. So you're just doing the right thing for the long-term benefit.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully, like you can make some money for it, but like but yeah, it's a little bit longer term. It's a longer game, and that's been a theme that's resonated throughout our conversation today, is that long term benefit. So, and I just think it's an important it's an important theme or important expectation to have as as you are involved in the community. Um,
Yeah, and I go back to, and I'm just curious if there's anything else we haven't talked about in terms of, again, we're talking to a CEO, a president. He's looking at the role of partnerships. So we've
mhm.
talked about community involvement, but when you think about what's the role, for engaging the business and the community, what role do partners play in this? How
A
do you
partner.
identify the right partner organizations, the right initiatives that align with what you're doing? Is there a methodology that you would suggest for presidents or CEOs to go through that?
I mean, my experience is that those partnerships, like they are, I guess you look at like everybody brings a different skill set to the table. So like the partnerships are huge because you have experts in all fields. We can't be experts in everything. And so if you have a mission, and you say, hey, like, I can bring like the manufacturing mindset to the table. That's awesome. But then you might need a financial person. So let's bring a financial expert in there. You might need a legal person. So let's bring a legal person in there. And I look at that like that's similar to how I've always been able to approach my businesses. I look at myself as a consultant to my clients, and you kind of bring in like you want to have a lot of our clients don't have boards of directors because they're smaller than that and that's just not part of it. So you use your banker, like that partnership, you use your banker, you use an attorney, you use a CPA, and maybe another consultant as your consultants, as your board for your business. That's just an example of like kind of those partnerships that are just natural. How you go about finding those people is just it's again like getting out there and meeting people and talking to people and figuring out who that tribe should be. When you're talking to somebody whether or not they're gonna like, well, after over time you're gonna figure out whether they can be a beneficial partner or not. um, and it's okay if it doesn't if they're not the right fit. It's okay to move on, and like in a respectful way, but you don't want to waste people's time because time is short.
Yeah, and I appreciate this because like all those things you were mentioning, I'm not a financial expert. Thank you for your service, right? And and it's important that you do find that group of individuals around you that you can partner with. And this is true for both your service partners for your business, but it's also true with as you're looking for those opportunities to get involved in the community. It's the same process, right? I'm
Right.
actually business developing to go out and look for who are all the community partners I could partner with, but which are the ones I should partner with, and narrowing down that list to the ones that are going to align with your mission and your values and the rest of it. I think that's a really great outcome. So that's a good approach. I know when I did it, I scanned the environment, like even on the banking side. I went out and I talked to 20 plus banks in the Twin Cities to try to find the right bank, and then finding the right bank, finding the right person in the bank that shared the mission, vision, core values, all the things that. And as we do that, what I've appreciated about, you and I hanging out is we have so much alignment, it makes it easy to work on these types of things together. And I think that's important for the, president CEOs as they're building their partnership community. If they haven't thought of it that way,
Yeah.
finding those that align with their values and align with their missions is really what they should be looking for within their partners.
Yeah, that is key. That's well said on your part. To find that alignment with core values is extremely important. Like that's the key to it.
Well, and so from that perspective, we talked a little bit now about the partnerships and the opportunities in there. So I guess from your standpoint, are there any other stories, breakthroughs, anything else that you think would be helpful for a group like this to hear?
I just say like keep your eyes open and your ears open and keep your mind open to opportunities. I can share a small example. Well, I'll try to condense this story into. So I got involved in a project in Wayzata. I was living overseas in a small village on the lake shore of Lake Geneva in Switzerland.
That
The
sounds rough.
Yeah, I know, really rough. They had in this little village and around the lake shore, they had like a walking path, a path along the lake shore. It had parks, like playgrounds for kids. It had like cafes and restaurants and all this. And it was a great place when we lived there. Our daughters were young, and we spent so many great hours on this lake walk at the playground and all that. It was just a key part of it was a great experience. Moved back to Wyzetta, and a friend approached me again, like a long-term contact, approached me and said, "Hey, we're trying to redevelop the Wyzetta Lakeshore into a public space with the lake walk and a place for multiple generations to hang out and all this." And I'm like, "Wow, this is awesome! Like, I just came from an environment that had this. Sure, I'll get involved." So I said, yeah, so let's look. I didn't know what that meant, but then it was trying to start this project, which is pretty Herculean, trying to take these baby steps of how do we get this to happen. It took city buy-in, it took regional partners buy-in, all sorts of things. Like all sorts of things had to happen. So got involved, saw like meetings with city leaders, the city council, saw a council member in particular who would always kill the meetings with her negativity. And I thought,
We'll leave the names out.
I'm not going to mention any names. Then I thought, you know what? Like this could be so much better if I got involved on the city council, and and we didn't have that kind of negativity in these meetings. We looked at what's possible, not what's impossible. And so, it's like without putting much thought into it, ran for city council, and next thing I know, I'm on the city council, and now I'm shaping the policy, and helping pave a path forward for this project to happen. And this has been 10 years in the making. I never expected I was going to get into city politics, but there I was because I had this idea of what I wanted this lakeshore to be, because of this experience I had with my own kids. So went through the process, like on the city council, we got like the whole team of people came together to make this happen. And this is a huge collaboration project. And now, I don't know if you've been down to Wyzetta recently.
Oh, yeah.
We have a beautiful lake walk now. We have like enhanced public docks. We have a park and walking paths. And one of the reasons why I did it was to create this experience. Another one was to help the community of Wyzetta, help the businesses thrive in the area. You go down there now, and like all this stuff now, all the naysayers throughout the process are now like, I see them down there, and I ask them like, what do you think? And we love it. Like we except for they'll always have their except for, but I see people. I mean, multiple generations, grandparents pushing strollers with their grandkids. I see people from all parts of the Twin Cities area coming down there and hanging out. The restaurants are packed, the businesses are doing well, and people are just like, creates a nice space to hang out. All of this said, like that was like 10 years in the making, and me going down paths that I never would have envisioned going down if I didn't kind of keep my mind open and kind of thinking about like, how could I be a part of this?
Well, I will say Wayzata is one of the gems. You look at that boardwalk, I always think about it like a French Riviera kind of mindset. It's amazing. So kudos. And if anybody's watching this that has experienced it, lived in the community, feel free to reach out to Dan and say thank you. So I think the closing of that is engagement is ongoing. Like you have to just understand this is a long ball kind of play. You got to get engaged, stay focused in one area, never stop building, never stop growing. So what I close with then for our discussion today is, if you want to learn more after watching this about fostering relationships, building community engagement within your business, just feel free to reach out to us. And, Dan, myself, others on our team are willing to help, think about strategies for building that lasting success. So again, thanks, Dan, for joining us. Remember, I always let people know just success in business isn't just the numbers. It isn't just doing the short-term thing. It's really about relationships and what you can build for the future. And so I just really appreciate this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you bringing me in and having this conversation. I always enjoy talking with you. So look forward to the next one.
Awesome.